of Gateway Center of Excellence and Rural Health's virtual lecture series. Today's date is June 4th, 2024, and the topic for the lecture is entitled From Aging to Eldering, Exploring the Development of the Elder. My name is Nicole Gilroy, and I'm a research assistant here at Gateway. Gateway is a not-for-profit organization based in Huron County with the mission to improve the health and well-being of rural residents through research, education, and communication. To our knowledge, we are the only rural health research center in Canada governed by community-based volunteers, not attached as a research arm of a larger academic institution. The lecture is part of a knowledge translation project to promote and mobilize understanding of health in rural communities. Before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the land. The Gateway office resides on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. Under the dish of one spoon wampum, these groups agreed to care for the land and its resources by the Great Lakes in peace. We would like to acknowledge the history of the traditional territory of the land, now known as rural southern Ontario, and honor the long-standing relationships of the Indigenous peoples across the region. Gateway's Center of Excellence in Rural Health recognizes the inequities connected to colonization, which can impact health outcomes, and are committed to working towards creating a just, inclusive, and vibrant community for all. Now, I will introduce our presenter for today's lecture. Do we gain wisdom as we age and grow? Presenter Al Lauzon, Professor Emeritus from the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development at the University of Guelph, and Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health's Research Chair of Rural Change and Development, will delve into a deep understanding on this topic. And supporting this discourse are two panelists, Lorraine van Ewyk, a psychotherapist and current PhD student at the University of Guelph in the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development, and Amanda Mongeon, manager of the Community Health-Timiskaming Health Unit, and also current PhD student at the University of Guelph. To thank those that are ongoing attendees, we offer certificates at the end of each semester to those with perfect attendance to recognize your commitment to and involvement with this educational series. This June lecture marks the end of the spring semester, so hopefully you have attended and enjoyed the other lectures that we've had this spring. Throughout the lecture, we encourage participants to ask questions of the panelists and lecturer. Add your questions to the chat box and they will be addressed. And just a brief disclaimer, the views expressed in this lecture may not necessarily reflect Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health's views or opinions, but we believe in providing a platform for a range of perspectives and thoughtful discussion. So I will now pass it on to Al to begin the lecture.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my video for now and put up some slides. So I'll turn off my video and share my screen, hopefully, and get started. So I'm actually not going to use the slide review because I've got some quirky things happening with my PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. So first, I'd like to welcome everyone to this Gateway lecture. And second, I need to qualify this talk with, I'm not an expert in the area of eldership or aging, merely an interested person. I'm not nearly as qualified as my two colleagues, Amanda and Lorraine, and I'm delighted that they were willing to join me and ultimately indulge me in my musings on eldership. To start, I'd like to begin with 2 points. First, people are meaning-making creatures, and meaning is essential to our well-being and health. We need meaning in our lives or else we atrophy emotionally, spiritually, and in some cases, physically. Second, Carl Jung once wrote that a human being would certainly not grow to be 70 or 80 years old if this longevity had no meaning to the species to which he belonged. The afternoon of life must also have significance of its own and cannot be merely an appendage to life's morning. It is older adults who have the life experience to know what is truly important. They understand the fundamentals of being a good human if they are willing to do the work necessary to cultivate wisdom. As we age, we have two choices. We can choose to merely grow old, or we can choose to age with awareness and intention. If we choose not to age with awareness and intention, then aging will not be an adventure characterized by continued growth and development, and will likely view age as a time of decline and perhaps even despair. The psychologist Erik Erikson said the afternoon of life is characterized by either integrity or despair. For those who let go without seeing the potential of what aging offers, they will likely experience despair. They will become the stereotypical cantankerous and curmudgeonly senior, the one who seemingly has a dark cloud that constantly hangs over them. They're not a lot of fun to be around. For those who are willing to age with awareness and intention, they acknowledge decline and loss, for we all experience some decline as we enter the final stage of life. However, despite any loss, it is countered by seeing new possibilities as they age. For those who age with awareness and intention, elderhood becomes a possibility, and that is what I wish to chat about today, the journey of the older adult and the developmental process of becoming an elder. This is a picture of my grandmother. She was, in my opinion, a remarkable woman, an elder. She was born in 1892 and lived in Walsburg, Ontario. To the best of my knowledge, she had a grade 4 education. She was a midwife and a practical nurse. She delivered babies and stayed with families that were quarantined. She was always engaged in the community, whether that was through the church or the lodge she belonged to. When I was 5, my father died and my grandmother came to live with us. She brought with her a lifetime of experience and wisdom. I can still see her working in the garden in my mind's eye when she was in her early 80s, bent over from the waist, pulling weeds out of the garden. She was a very wise woman, something I did not truly appreciate until after she passed on and I had grown and developed some humility, allowing me to see things differently. She lived her life in service to others, and it was in service to others that she derived her life's meaning. She taught me many things about life and living. I was lucky to have her in my life for as long as I did. And I'm grateful for all she taught me and all she taught to others. She was, in my opinion, an elder. And an elder continues to grow and learn, serves others, and knows how to celebrate the joy of living despite the hardships that are encountered. This talk, in many ways, is inspired by the life of my grandmother. So why is eldering important to us collectively? Ron Penvey wrote, "The wisdom and gift of elders has been universally valued as necessary for the emotional and spiritual health and balance of societies. We face many challenges today. There are many who argue that we live in times of uncertainty, and despite having more knowledge than we've ever had at our fingertips, things just seem to get worse. As Penvey notes, most cultures across time and space have always valued their elders, yet our culture is pervaded by ageism, which negates the value and wisdom of our older adults. In fact, we often characterize aging as offering only decline, disease, and despair. Ironically, the more challenging the world becomes, the more we are in need of elders and their wisdom. By 2050, those 60 years of age and older will make up 22% of the global population. We now have an unprecedented number of older adults, but ironically, fewer and fewer become elders as ageist beliefs negate the possibility that they might have something of value to offer. What they really have to offer is the whole notion of wisdom. And so I start by posing the question, what is wisdom and how is it different from knowledge? Wisdom is often described as the fundamental pragmatics of life. Wisdom is that which guides us and provides insights into questions about the human condition, questions about meaning, and what is the purpose of life. The elder is an expert in life that is cultivated through a lifetime of experiences, both joys and challenges. Wisdom brings thinking together. Wisdom brings together thinking and feeling and brings our inner world in contact with the material world. True wisdom is timeless and independent of scientific knowledge. When I think of wisdom, I think of the Chinese sage Lao Tzu, who was asked to write down what he had learned in life before he left the city. This is the book of wisdom that we know as the Tao Te Ching that describes, from my perspective, the essentials and guidance of how to live life. But Lao Tzu is simply one older adult who was asked to share what he had learned from life. The world is populated by many older adults who can potentially contribute their wisdom, just as Lao Tzu did in his time, if we honor them, support them, and if we ask them. Wisdom is not something we can acquire early in life. In fact, it is not something that can be acquired in the sense that knowledge is. It can only be cultivated through reflection on a life lived. Wisdom can guide us in the challenges we face, but also guide us in how to live our day-to-day lives. It is here in the day-to-day where we derive the meaning of our lives, as it was for my grandmother. Unfortunately, we live in a culture that valorizes youthfulness, accomplishment, whatever that is, and the heroic journey. We are a culture that views aging through the lens of ageism, whereby getting older simply offers decline, disease, and despair. Ageism is a barrier to successful and meaningful aging. The World Health Organization notes that ageism is the only acceptable ism. It's more frequent than racism or sexism, and that 1 in 2 people hold ageist beliefs. In many ways, ageism can be described as a social disease that impacts the health and well-being of older adults in negative ways. These impacts include shorter lifespans, poorer mental and physical health, slower recovery from disability, increased cognitive decline, and increased social isolation and loneliness, to name a few. A study in the United States estimated that ageism costs their healthcare system $65 billion a year. With ageism, there's a cost to older individuals and a financial cost to healthcare systems, not to mention the loss of potential wisdom. The question then becomes, how do we counter ageism and support the growth and development of older adults so that they might move through life and aging, embracing the journey of the elder? As a psychotherapist, James Hollis has written, it is challenging, for there are no schools for older adults and few supports for meaningful aging. The starting point, from my perspective, providing the necessary supports for older adults is to understand the developmental journey they must take in order to become an elder. The journey of the elder often starts before they even reach the status of older adult or senior. We need to understand how the adult develops over time and where relationship fits in the scheme, or where eldership fits in the scheme of human development. We can think of the life cycle as being divided in 2 halves. In the first half of adult life, we seek to establish our place in the world of adults. We attempt to answer the question, what does the world ask of me? We forge intimate relationships, perhaps start a family, acquire a job, or develop a career that allows us to join the adult world and work toward realizing the so-called good life. We strive to fit in with societal expectations so that we might be productive, valued, and deemed successful. This often means subscribing to what others think we should be and how we should act. And this will carry us on until we begin to feel a sense of dissatisfaction. We begin to feel a tension in life, and we may experience a sense of emptiness. This time in life is really captured in the musical question that Peggy Lee posed so many years ago, is that all there is? The happiness we thought we had no longer seems to be enough. We need more in life than we currently have, and this means we may have to reevaluate the life path we have chosen to follow. During this time, we may make fundamental changes in our life, or simply reframe our lives and priorities in ways that give us the meaning we seek. These feelings mark the beginning of entering the second stage of adult life. There's no set chronological age when this questioning begins. It may happen when you're 30, it may happen when you're 65, or for some, it may never happen. Those of us who fail to question or are unable to question and reevaluate our lives and adjust may experience in time what Erickson described as despair. When older adults experience despair, it's not a pleasant place to be, and one's life may be filled with disappointment and regret. Life just doesn't make sense, and there may be an increase in bitterness as they continue to age. In between moving from the first half of life to the second half of life, we experience what is called liminal space, or what the psychologist William Bridges describes as the neutral zone, a space between an ending and a new beginning. This is a difficult time as we experience a real sense of dissatisfaction with our current life and remain anxious and unsure where our life will take us. We need to have patience and trust that we will eventually work our way through this space to create a different life with different priorities and goals. We trade a pursuit of happiness for a pursuit of meaningfulness. This is a time when the process of healing past hurts begins, for no one gets out of life unscathed. Each of us has a past that requires some healing, or coming to terms with past events we may have perpetuated upon others, or others perpetuated upon us, or it may simply be dealing with the regret we experience as a result of decisions we made in the past. This can be a time of forgiveness of oneself and others, should we choose to forgive. As we enter the second half of life, the question changes from what does the world ask of me to what does the soul ask of me. It's the time to let go of who we thought we were, grounded in the expectations of others, to let go and become the authentic self, the self that we've always been. It is a time, according to Carl Jung, to exercise our own personal authority as we become concerned less concerned with what others think, and more concerned with what we think. Life can no longer stay rooted in expectations and assumptions of our earlier life, so we let them go. We move from a me agenda to a we agenda, where we become increasingly concerned with others and the world at large. Erickson described this state as a stage where we surrender our self-absorption for generativity, we become mentors, or we become more involved in our community in meaningful ways. We're concerned with making the world a better place, whatever that may look like to us, for no two journeys are the same. As we move forward in our journey, we may enter the realm of the elder. We need to remember that to become an elder requires a certain amount of life experience, and while age is a necessary condition to become an elder, it is not a sufficient condition for eldership. Depends upon what an older adult does with his or her lifetime of experiences. So the question becomes, how is an elder different from someone who's simply getting older? As we enter into later life, we let go of the facade we have presented to the world and become that who we've always been. It may be a time where we pick up interests from earlier in life that we let go as we entered the first half of adult life. As we develop greater knowledge of ourselves and become more accepting of who we are, this is often accompanied by a desire to live our lives differently. We experience a longing to be more authentic, to not hide behind prescribed roles, and accept who we are and our lives without pretense or judgment. We become more comfortable living with uncertainty and paradox, and as we surrender the me agenda, we develop the capacity to see multiple perspectives. And in becoming more accepting of ourselves, complete with all our angelic and demonic qualities, we become more accepting and less judgmental of others. If we were successful in our own journey, we will become more tolerant, more patient, more open-minded, more understanding, more compassionate, and less critical. We have a better understanding of life and its mysteries. We do not take life for granted and know what is important. While earlier adult life may have been competitive and hectic with doing, we are now motivated to slow down and support the journey of others in cultural changes that enhance the well-being of the many. There's no seeking glory or accolades, only doing one's best to make a difference where one can. We have moved from being a doer or a maker to being more of a contemplator and supporter. The elder is committed to both their own being and becoming, and committed to bringing what they have learned from their life's journey to assist in meeting challenges we face to make the world a better place. My friend Pete Smith said his dad always told him to leave the campsite cleaner than he found it. These are the words of an elder, and in many ways this is the work of the elder, to leave the world in a better state than one found it. We become more aware and concerned with something larger than our own personal lives. The elder embraces playfulness, and to be playful is not to negate the seriousness of life. It is to invoke the spirit of creativity and imagination, so we might use playfulness to address some of the greater challenge we face, both individually and collectively. Elders are not usually our heroic leaders leading organizations or governments or accomplishing great feats. They are the guardians and mentors of the meaningfulness of everyday life. The psychiatrist George Valiant alludes to this when he wrote, "You cannot be wise about what you have not lived through. The meaning of life is not found in a list of heroic accomplishments, but in living our lives with integrity. The elder does not seek the approval of others, and the only respect that matters is self-respect." This leads to the question of how do we support older adults in becoming elders? As noted earlier, we live in a culture that valorizes youth and demonizes old age. We live in an ageist culture where often the older adult is ignored and disregarded or perceived as a burden rather than having insight and wisdom that we might all benefit from. As James Hollis has noted, despite our decline, our latter years are characterized by latent potentials, our capacity to offer wisdom, wise counsel, and support. First, much of the work to become an elder is autobiographical. Wisdom is not acquired through instruction by others. Wisdom is not learning about, but is learning through life by reflecting on one's journey. We need to let go of the past hurts and resentments and to accept current decline in our abilities and capacities with grace. When we make peace with those areas where we may experience decline, we're able to find the joy in life, having the privilege to watching a rising sun or to be awed by the curiosity and inquisitiveness of a young child. We learn to savor both the preciousness and joy of each moment of life. That does not mean that there won't be times that are tough when we experience the physical limits of aging. I often think of my sister who passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 82. She had macular degeneration and could not see well. She had a permanent opening in her abdomen. She had congestive heart failure. Her knees were shot and could not walk or have surgery because the risk of surgery was too great given her health status. She was a remarkably courageous woman who met each new day glad to be alive, and was able to celebrate each day with joy. She used to say kiddingly to me she wasn't dying because she was too damn nosy to leave. I learned much from my sister, particularly in the last few years of her life. She was at peace with the life she had lived, and she was at peace where she was in her life, even in decline. She never despaired, continued to smile and laugh. She certainly had her bad days in terms of her health, but still celebrated life, even on those bad days. A very remarkable and wise woman who taught me much through the conversations we had and the stories she told me. As we learn to be at peace and accept the limits aging brings with it, we can learn to love in a new way, to love with what Erik Erikson described as agape. Agape is considered the highest form of love, an unconditional love. It is a love that is rooted in compassion, empathy, and hope. It is love that often arises when we are able to let go of the me agenda and embrace the we agenda. The elder is no longer self-absorbed, but they are concerned with making a difference in people's lives where they can and are grateful for what life still offers. It's a time of engagement and an openness to being transformed through engagement, whether it's engagement with one's own story in life or engagement with the larger community. This learning process, if successful, leads to an enriched life and an enriched understanding of one's own journey and of life in general. It can also lead to new ways of being with others and to sharing the wisdom one has cultivated to help and support the journey of others. We have a collective responsibility to eradicate ageist beliefs and provide opportunities for older adults so that they can choose to live meaningful lives, to travel the path of the elder and not just put in time, and to provide opportunities for them to share what they have learned. I want to return to my grandmother and her story. In her 80s, my grandmother started to black out and fall at home, often seriously injuring herself. No one was home with her during the day as my mom had to work and I was in school. She went into long-term care and was doing reasonably well. She was what staff referred to as a busybody, and she could often be found helping other residents or making their beds, etc. Remember, she had lived her life and found meaning in being in service to others. Finally, staff told her she had to stop doing these things and she should just go sit in the chair. When I visited her, something had changed. The spark that had been there before had been extinguished. She died a couple months later, and I've always believed she died because the one thing that brought her life meaning, being in service to others, had been taken from her, and she had no reason for getting up in the morning, and one morning she didn't. She was gone from this world. Regardless of age, we all need to live meaningful lives, perhaps each in our own way, even as life's sunset is upon us. Some older adults will not want to do the work to become an elder. They may be tired and are content in filling their time with friends and recreational activities, and there's nothing wrong with that. But all older adults should be entitled to the choice of whether they want to do the work of the elder, to seek and cultivate what they have learned through their life's journey and opportunities to share that wisdom. As I said earlier, they are the guardians of the meaningfulness of everyday life, and we are in need of the wisdom that helps us understand what is really important in life. We are individually and collectively responsible for creating opportunities and supports for older adults to become elders through activities that assist them in reflecting on their lives, be it through supporting life review or the writing of memoirs or engagement with others in the broader community, should they choose to, or simply asking family members and friends what they've learned through their life. Conversations, I venture to say, we rarely have. I remember the conversations I had with my mom in her last few years about her life, about highs and lows, regrets, and what she'd learned through life. I think these conversations were healing for my mom and for me. She left me to ponder the wisdom she had distilled through her life. Life was complete, and she left this world as an elder. I ponder now if her life would have felt completed had she never had the chance to share what she had learned through her 86 years on this planet. It's never too late to become an elder and share one's wisdom. It's never too late to ask our loved ones what they learned through their life's journey. It's never too late to make peace with one's life. Thank you for indulging me my musings on becoming an elder, and I'd now like to turn to my colleagues for their insights. And we will start with Loren, and I'll just stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Loren.
Oh, thank you, Al. I so cherish the story, and I think so often when we think about our elders and making meaning from life, and one thing that you touched on there is that inherent value. Oftentimes, whether I'm working with children or older individuals, the challenge around inherent value is always kind of tabled. It's always something that we kind of talk about, because when we value life and when we value what people bring, it makes for a rich environment of learning. And I think, as you talked about wisdom, I think that's part of wisdom, right? Part of wisdom is a willingness to learn. There's an old proverb that says, a wise person continues to learn wisdom, meaning we're willing to be learners. And I think I think that's part of how we make meaning from the work that we do in whatever realm that is, whether that's within our family we make meaning, or I work a lot within the agricultural area, and so I see a lot of farmers go through succession planning, and there's a transition of role that occurs. And actually, just this past weekend, I was up in Huron, Perth, and I was talking to a Mennonite man as he shared that his wife of 60 years had passed away from a brain tumor, and certainly would be regarded in his community as an elder. And yet he too was struggling with making meaning in life, and maybe not struggling, but looking for it, looking to make meaning from the suffering his wife experienced, from the role he now plays as a individual who doesn't have his life companion with him any longer on this earth. And so it's very interesting to me, because to me, it comes back to a form of resilience. And that when we make meaning, when we are committed learners, it's part of the story of resilience. And it's really kind of a critical aspect of the human condition, where we feel a sense of purpose in spite of pain, or we feel a sense of purpose, just as you shared about your mom, that she, even though, she was having blackout incidences, but in the home where she was living, she had purpose up until she was told that her purpose was no longer. And so I think, when I'm working with that population, quite often that's where a lot of our work sits with, is making an understanding and coming to an understanding of maybe if there's a role change that has gone on. Perhaps there's we have to redefine our identity, whereas we were farmers and now we don't feel like that identity suits us in the same way. And so we really have to find that transition in that aging population, or in that the group that we're working with, or the individual. Even better yet is that individual connection. I'm not sure, Al, if you wanted to kind of ask questions, or Amanda, if you wanted to kind of join in that portion of the conversation. I can just continue to chat, particularly about identity with our aging population, but feel free to stop me or let me know how you'd like to kind of proceed.
Why don't you go ahead and talk for 4 or 5 more minutes about identity, and then we'll turn it over to Amanda to offer her reflections, and then maybe the three of us can come back. There are some questions that have been asked.
Yeah.
And we can collectively reflect on those.
Absolutely. And that piece about identity, it's interesting to me, because we all have identity. And part of identity is, as we age, we shift. And you talked about it as well. As a young person, we talk about what our goals are. We want to create a home and a stable life, maybe for children, or for a community involvement, whatever that identity would be. My dad actually passed away in 2022. And before he passed, honestly, I thought I did everything I could to soak up his wisdom. because I remember even he came over and we wrote down the instructions to how to work the baler for our machine because we knew it took a special touch. He just had this ingenuity, you know, he could think outside the box. He understood machinery and mechanisms. And so I really wanted to kind of absorb all that he had to give us. And even so, you know, it's very rare that a week goes by that I don't think, or my husband and I don't say, oh, if Dad was here, he'd know how to fix that. And I think for our seniors, that identity is that there's a transition portion that goes through, and as you go through the aging process and becoming an elder. And I appreciated so much there what you said about, you know, not everyone necessarily becomes the elder, or, you know, that it's a journey as well. And you had talked about that life of almost integrity. You didn't use the word integrity, but understanding that there's a learning aspect to it. And so much of this identity and this transition for our older population is a learning process for them and a learning process for those of us who haven't begun that journey portion. Although I would argue that we begin that quite early. I think to myself, am I in this position where I hope so? I hope I have a teachable, you know, person. I hope that my identity is part of a willingness to learn from others, so that I do achieve that place of eldership as I age. But the identity transition, when we talk about how we change it, it might look like roles. You know, on a farm, if you were the main caregiver for your animals and now you're no longer, what is that role now in comparison to what it was before? And so embracing that change of roles. Certainly when we're young, we understand that there's a change of roles that happen, right? Like we know that as a student in high school, our role changes when we perhaps have children, or our role changes when we go to post-secondary or, you know, transition into the workforce, whatever that looks like. We have a change of roles and we're willing to accept those. And yet for some reason, maybe through ageism or through the other, we have a hard time accepting that transition of role in among our elders, from both perspectives. And so I think what I hope when I work with people who are older than I am, that we can champion that eldership and that role and who they are and how much of wisdom and how rich our community is for it. In fact, in North America, it's one of the few cultures where our, you know, aged population doesn't live with us. There's many populations where there's 3 and sometimes 4 generations living under the same roof. And, you know, there's an appreciation for the role that person retains as the patriarch or matriarch of the family. And so when we really struggle with that identity transition, is there ways that we can champion that transition rather than not want it to occur, rather than kind of be abrasive against it? You know, what can we do to advocate for that transitional role and yet value that role, that inherent value that's there? So yeah, those are a couple of the things that I would kind of, you know, add to the conversation, both about making meaning and about our identity. But I'm happy to answer questions or engage that way as well.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. We'll turn it over to Amanda to get her reflections, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Al, and thanks, Lorraine. I have to say both of you and what you've talked about have made me think of the book Tuesdays with Maury. If Gateway Lectures had a book club portion, that would be my contribution for today, and I recommend it to folks if you haven't read it. Al, what you talked about around the second stage of life and the description of the second stage of life was really striking for me. And I think I really identify with a lot of that, you know, that entry point, that starting of that second stage of life. And that's probably what led me to decide to go back to school in middle age. But specifically, I don't think I've heard that description before, and it's wonderful. And it makes me feel excited about what's to come and a little bit less alone in that feeling that I've had about like, is this all there is? And so thanks for that. I'm here to talk about public health. I want to acknowledge some colleagues of my own for their help as I spent some time to update knowledge of the work happening here, especially in Northern Ontario around ageism and healthy aging. So specifically, Lorna Damaris, she's a public health promoter here in Temiskaming, and Larissa Veras is a public health nurse in Sudbury. Really, there's a growing number of people who are paying attention to this topic in their work, which I think is really heartening. Now, coming from public health, I definitely agree that ageism is definitely impacting the well-being of a lot of people. So, for example, here in Temiskaming only, about 20% of our population is 65 and over. So that's 1 in 5 people. In Ontario, more broadly, it's closer to 16%, but we also know in general, rural communities have a higher proportion of older adults. So I really do appreciate Gateway's making space for today's conversation. We know also that chronological age is not really a meaningful construct because it fails to really allow us to account for the variation of experiences, abilities, and risks among this very large population group. But regardless, we really need to stop equating frailty and risk and age with an inability to contribute and share wisdom. So there's a couple of things to pay attention to there. And something else that I've been thinking about is while we know ageism is a huge issue, I'm not sure that society really reflects what we also know culturally or intuitively, that our older adults have value. Like I think, as Al said, our society emphasizes innovation and youth, which in turn devalues our older adults. But I don't think we as individuals fully buy into that ageism. I think it's more systems and structures that have integrated it. And then that makes me hopeful that maybe there's a chance to turn the tide. But Al asked me here to talk about a public health perspective. I work in local public health, but I think about public health in 2 ways. There's sort of the shared work we do to support the health of the public. I'll call it like theoretical public health or maybe small p. And then there's the institutions that we have that do the work. So in Ontario, that would be public health units and like big P, public health. So the big picture takeaway I want to offer is that I think ageism is an issue, but at least within the institutions of public health, we're moving in a really good direction. So I think as public health, as an institution, we for sure contribute to ageism, and we also have a role in helping us to collectively address it. So that can look like a few different things. First, examining the programs and services that we have within public health, because I think we really bias our investments towards children and youth. Our public health standards is the mandate that we have in Ontario, focuses on healthy growth and development, but hasn't necessarily adjusted to reflect the growing older adult population. Over on my desk here, I have taped up our organization's strategic plan, which is healthy communities where everyone can thrive. And so we do know we need to take an across the lifespan approach. And so we just need to make sure we're doing that. And I think the perspectives with how we think about health has maybe also contributed to that ageism playing out. For example, in youth, we're looking towards how can we optimize the health for our young people? But then as people age, we shift to more of that biomedical model where we start just talking about how do we prevent death and disability? I don't think it's intentional. And I think it's in part because our system's bottom line is so focused on minimizing healthcare spending that we sort of shift paradigms in ways that maybe we could avoid and do better with. As a specific example, here in Northeastern Ontario, we've been working, so public health, local public health has been working with Ontario Health, and before that, the LHINs, for a number of years on initiatives related to preventing falls among older adults. Now, recently, we've managed to shift the framing just a little bit towards healthy aging, which is positive, right? We're not just saying prevent falls, we're saying we want to support healthy aging, but ultimately, we're still being measured by how well we do at supporting healthy aging in order to prevent falls. So I think there's more to be done there. And we can also really try to take more of an across the lifespan approach to our organizational mandates. So again, in Ontario Public Health, the topic of healthy sexuality was added to our standards. And for those who may not be familiar, the topic is there. It says, understand the needs in your community, and essentially, I'm paraphrasing, do what's needed to address that need. And so for us in that topic, that's meant looking across the lifespan at where we can be promoting healthy sexuality. And a significant part of our work is looking to do so among our older adult population, both in community settings and institutional settings. Violence is another topic that's recently been added to our mandate and is leading us to revisit our work in preventing elder abuse. And I think we could also be investing further in getting a better understanding even of what the issue of ageism through research and local engagement, and then using that same engagement to inform effective initiatives to help older adults truly thrive. I think public health can also be contributing to shifting the narratives around how we talk about aging. And so that could involve investing in education to help enhance empathy or dispel misconceptions about different age groups. We can invest in helping people walk the talk through intergenerational programming. Gateway's Grand Sparks program is a great example of that, bringing grandparents together with younger people. There's some individual health units who are showing great leadership in this. A resource I'll point you to is Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit launched a web page focused specifically on challenging ageism. And then an important role in public health is also promoting healthy public policy. And we can, as public health units, be engaging with others in the community to advocate for policy shifts around interventions for older adults, hopefully ones that step away from using chronological age as a determining factor. I think there's national work going on for a national plan on ageism. Ontario has recently started a healthy aging public health network. So people are starting to talk about each other and think about how we can do this. But ultimately, that's just the institution of public health, but we all have a role. So this is the shifting to the small p public health. Like Al said, we have a collective responsibility to eradicate ageist beliefs. So we can collectively address some of the consequences of those ageist beliefs. There are far too many older adults who live in poverty, who are facing housing insecurity, and who are impacted by loneliness. And those are not things that any one organization is going to solve. Other things that we can each do individually are becoming aware of ageism. So all those who attended today's talk are already making a good step in that direction. Developing skills to speak up when we encounter it, and then becoming an advocate. And then municipalities also can show leadership, for example, through age-friendly community initiatives. So I'll stop there and leave space for some of the questions and more discussion.
Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions. First of all, thank you, Loren, and thank you, Amanda, for your insights. That was really, really quite good. Amanda, I just want to make one comment. When you talked about, the issue of seniors or older adults and sexuality, and the whole issue that because we make assumptions about seniors, sexually transmitted diseases are problematic in a senior population because we assume they're not engaged, so they don't get the right information about that. And the other one that's come up in the news lately that's sort of intrigued me is cannabis overdose based on edibles by seniors because they don't understand sort of how to actually use edibles when they go to them. So I think there's some issues of health in that. And I think part for me, and I've thought a lot about notions of health, and we so often equate health with sort of the biomedical model that I've kind of replaced thinking about health with well-being. Well-being speaks to a much sort of broader canvas, if I can put it like that, than health. And I think that's the broad canvas that we need to understand older adults and to support older adults, and for older adults to provide or to bring what they have learned through life to us. One of the questions I thought was, there's actually quite a few comments. Brian Smith asked, what is the role of organizations like Learning Unlimited? That's one I'm not familiar with. And the organizations you mentioned, Brian, I'm not familiar with. I think part of the issue is that, and there's great value in it, that a lot of the quote learning organizations or educational organizations for seniors, from my perspective, provide learning about, not learning through. To me, that's a critical difference. So I think those things where those educational programs that provide learning about, I think they play a valuable role. But my experience and understanding is that there are very few supports that help adults with learning through. And part of the challenge, and I'd be interested on Amanda and Loren's perspective, is we back away from that and say, well, that's the realm of psychotherapy or psychology, or you need to talk to a counselor about that or that. So any reflections on sort of our perceptions about when learning becomes really experiential in that meaningful way that can raise issues for people that they need to probably address in some level. So whichever one of you wants to sort of take it, feel free.
Sure. I can jump in there. And I hope I'm answering your question. I'm kind of reflecting, I'm reading Brian's question and kind of amalgamating the two, but he mentions, the Learning Unlimited and the retiree groups and unions. I would really ensure that we have an understanding that the social connectivity, that sense of belonging, is critical for all ages. And so those opportunities are really paramount. And it's interesting I think most retirees would say they're busier now as retired than what they were during their working years, formal working years, I should say, because a number of organizations such as the retirees in unions or volunteer opportunities are largely performed by our older population. And so they provide an invaluable role to our communities and through those mechanisms. And so they're very important, and we need to do what we can from a community perspective to support that. And there are opportunities in those groups for learning, as you mentioned, Al. Reflecting on the second piece, if I can conceptualize it properly, as a therapist, my job is actually, at least my hope is that people would take that opportunity all the time. And I had a phone call yesterday from a couple who were, late into their 70s looking for some support. And I admire so much because, again, that goal is learning. It's not even, I don't know. I guess the end result they would hope for is a form of problem solving, or support and tools and techniques to make life more enjoyable for them. But what I admire is the desire to learn. And, there are opportunities across the entire age spectrum where we can reach out for support, whether it's formal or informal. And sometimes we need to reach out for support more through a formal lens, simply because the informal is no longer accessible or available to us. And so I would hope that those become more opportunities for those within that population, within the senior population. And I think that's really what Amanda was speaking of too, that there's been some really great work happening to ensure that those opportunities are presented to make accessibility less of a deterrent for reaching out for those more formal senses of support.
And Al, your question or attention to experiential learning made me think about a podcast I was listening to last week. My husband pointed me towards it with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he was talking about lessons about Indigenous elders who are providing learning to young people directly. So this is that intergenerational experience. And what that led to was a type of learning that was far more complex and context-based than, say, that younger generation would have received sitting in a classroom or through book learning. And so that in this podcast, it led to them discussing further and reflecting on the way we learn and the amount of wisdom then we foster is linked to whatever society is going to privilege. So if we're privileging wisdom as a society, then so if we wanted to start privileging wisdom and support older adults becoming elders, then we may need to organize ourselves differently and start teaching ourselves differently and set people up differently than what we currently do. So that's a much more radical change, but that also links to, or makes me optimistic too, with all the reconciliation work that we're doing, that's helping us maybe recognize the value of older adults, recognize the value of different types of learning, and then that we may be able to do better than we have been.
I think too, experiential learning is such a solid form of learning when we think about, as you mentioned, within the school systems or, whatever that looks like. The experiential learning is meeting the needs of individuals who learn very differently. And so the knowledge that is passed on through that experience, as Amanda mentioned, is a much more concrete. When I'm working with individuals and we talk about what are some of those lessons we've learned, they will tell a story of an experience they had rather than, well, in grade 4, I learned, right? Like it's very much of an experience. So it's just as Amanda said, it changes their trajectory in a much larger sense rather than learning a lesson. And I think that's what our elders possess. And so as Amanda mentioned, to increase those opportunities for that to take place means the entire community, the entire group is much richer for it. And I think we lack sometimes those opportunities, and so we want to grow them.
I think it's really interesting, sort of the prominence of learning in all of this, something that we don't always necessarily equate with aging, but we learn throughout life. You touched on sort of story, and I think one of the ways that we learn, particularly later in life, is and we learn about ourselves is through stories. And you made me think of my mother-in-law, whose father, Gramps, used to tell stories all the time, and he used to tell a lot of the same stories over and over, and she'd get very frustrated about, you've told that story like 15 times, like why are you telling it again? And there isn't a recognition in the telling of the stories and the lessons that they're learning from the stories. They're really making sense of their life by telling us stories. And so it's not just to share with us, but it's to help them also makes sense. So stories become a very powerful vehicle for achieving understanding that, like you say, we live in a culture of bullets, right? Give me, or best practices. Give me, the 5 best practices. And I admit I have a bias against best practices, but we won't go. And so the type of culture and how we think about knowledge, how we think about information, even the idea of acquisition and acquiring, I think. So I think fundamentally we see a shift more towards stories, that stories have more relevance now than they used to. Even academics tell stories. And so I think story and narrative, and this gets back to, I think, when you were talking about identity too, Loren, that stories are also a way that we solidify and express our identity by the types of stories that we tell and the pertinent of those stories that we tell. So I just think that it's really incredibly interesting. I'll see, we're going to run out of time in a minute, but I'll see what other questions that have been posed here. Let's see.
I think someone asked about intergenerational
Okay.
kind of conversations. And real quick, I just wanted to mention, it's really about curiosity. We have to engage in our curious self. And from that comes learning. I think about my dad before he died. He had transitioned his role. He was no longer working actively on our farm. He was very much of an advisor though. And he transitioned how he did that. When I said an advisor, he rarely said, this is what you need to do, and gave me a bucket list of things to tick off. Instead, he used curiosity, and he would say, well, has that worked for you? Or is that working for you? Or what's your goal? Or, and allowing me to develop my own investigative skills and evaluation skills. And so when we talk about facilitating intergenerational conversations, we need to get curious. We need to understand why people come to their conclusions. And for our elders, I want to understand what life experiences they've engaged in that have grown their knowledge base and their experience base to share with me.
I think, well, go ahead, Amanda.
Well, just Loren, that curiosity goes both ways. I wanted to draw attention. So Dr. Scott Brown wrote a blog for Gateway just last week called Intergenerational War, What Is It Good For? And he was talking about the condescending way that younger generations can talk to or talk about older ones often right now, especially like in the context of climate change. We often see that where younger generations are sort of deriding the boomers, but he's calling us out to just consider the challenges that older adults have faced in life and to instead work with them. And this is quoting care, thought, and good humor. So I would add that to your list, Loren, of curiosity.
I think one of the things that sort of came up for me when you were talking, Loren, was, and Scott's blog was good. I really enjoyed it, is that the life experience that older adults acquire isn't necessarily to give them the wisdom to tell people what to do. Being an elder is not telling people what to do. Being an elder is being able to work with somebody within their own context, to know what questions to ask. And one of the things I said in the presentation, and Nicole's here to tell us to be quiet, or to tell me to be quiet, so I'll just be a minute. Yeah, now one of the disadvantages of being older is I think I forgot what I was going to say after I said that. But this whole idea of back in the 90s when we were talking about student-centered learning, and we talked about the sage on the side, which I really hated in the pedagogical literature. But there is an element of that it's the older people who can move into that eldership can really be that sage on the side that supports the development. And one of the things I said in the presentation is everybody has a unique path, a unique life. There's no curriculum for wisdom, but we need people who are responsive, not to give answers to people, but to ask them the right questions and support them in seeking the answers to those questions. I think that becomes really important. So Nicole, can I give Loren and Amanda just 1 minute to sort of say anything else that they would like to say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Amanda, we'll start with you.
Just thanks for making space for this conversation. I think those final comments you made, Al, were really pertinent in reminding us about not looking for all the answers from our elders, but really it's about inherent right to have health and be able to thrive and have that opportunity to make your choices and live your best life. And there's so much that we can also gain from letting that happen for all of us. So yeah, I guess I would leave it there.
Loren?
I think for myself, and thank you again for this opportunity. We really, and Amanda used the word inherent, and we have to come to this understanding of inherent value of each person and what they bring, and what a precious gift each person is in what they bring. And so whether in whatever phase that you engage with the population that we're chatting about today, understanding that inherent value of the wisdom that's been gained and learned through curiosity over the years.
Okay, thanks. My final word, thank Gateway for this opportunity to allow me to use out loud. So thank you to Gateway. Nicole, it's all yours.
Thank you, everybody. So as we conclude this lecture, we hope that this has proved to be educational and insightful into the topic of aging, wisdom, and the becoming of an elder. A huge thank you to our lecturer, Al Lauzon. And we would also like to thank our sponsors for their continued support. Without them, the lecture series would not be possible. These include MicroAge Basics, Goderich, McGee Motors, Goderich, Libro Credit Union, Lighthouse Money Management, Goderich, McEwan and Feagan Insurance Brokers, Goderich, Huron Telecommunications Co-operative, CERH Goderich, CIBC Wealth Management, and the Goderich Royal Canadian Legion Branch 109. Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health is a not-for-profit organization with charitable status, and we greatly appreciate and welcome any support that we receive. If you would like to donate to Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health to continue to support this lecture series and our other health projects, I encourage you to visit the Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health website at www.gatewayruralhealth.com/donate. We have no lectures planned for July or August, so our next lecture will be an in-person live event taking place in September. So more details about the live event and ticket sales and such will be released in July or August on our website and social media channels. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.